Alright, in this video I want to talk about Shavuot or Pentecost and calculating the correct date. Now, I've decided to study this to be sure of these things because of this right here. Now, when I first read this, I took this to mean that you count 7 Sabbaths, then you count 50 days, right? But most of the people that I've been listening to and talking to take it to mean that you're counting 7 Sabbaths and 50 days at the same time. That the next day after the 7th Sabbath, which would be 49 days, is the 50th day, right? And I was like, okay, I can see how you get that. But when I first read it, that's not how I saw it. And I'll explain a bit here, where at verse 15, it talks about counting 7 Sabbaths, right? And then it says, even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall ye number 50 days, and ye shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. So when I read that there, I was like, okay, I can see how you take it to mean you're counting 50 days with the 7th Sabbath, but I don't know why you're told to do it two different ways. If you're going to get 50 days if you count 7 Sabbaths anyway, right? Because the very next day would be the 50th day, right? Or actually, it wouldn't be the 50th day. You see, you count 7 Sabbaths after first fruits, right? And after first fruits, as I show on my calendar here, would be the day after a 7th day Sabbath. So if you count 7 Sabbaths after this, it's actually going to be 48 days. The next day is the 49th day, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in the first week when you get to the first Sabbath. So you're going to be off a day from the 49. The next day after the 7th Sabbath is actually the 49th day, not the 50th, right? So, well, looking into this, the reason why I have this picture up here is because the 10 Commandments were given at Shavuot or Pentecost, right? And this was done in the 4th month. What you got to do is you got to study this out and look in the scriptures for a feast day on the 3rd month or in the 3rd month, and you're not going to find it, which is kind of interesting. But you do find it in the 4th month, such as Shavuot, Pentecost, at the giving of the law. And there's an interesting parallel between the giving of the law to Israel and the pouring out of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost on the church, right? Like you have this kind of storm-like atmosphere happen at Mount Sinai. And in the room where they're gathered together, there's a great wind coming, right? And you have thunders and lightnings and God coming down in a pillar. And then you have the Holy Spirit coming down like tongues of fire upon the people, descending upon them. And at Shavuot, the first one, where the 10 Commandments were given, 3,000 people died because they were idolaters. But at Pentecost, 3,000 souls were saved, right? Showing you the contrast between how the letter brings death, but the Spirit brings life. And then after that, Paul starts preaching about how we're no longer under the letter of the law, but we're under the Spirit of the law. And he tells us that he was not giving this gospel from men, nor was he taught it, but by revelation of Jesus Christ, and that he actually went to Mount Sinai in Arabia, which is interesting because that's where the 10 Commandments were given and has a deep connection to Shavuot/Pentecost, right? So, putting all this together, I wanted to add detail to this to show you why we would count 7 Sabbaths, then 50 days. And I'm going to show you a few reasons why. Here's the first one. In Joel chapter 2, this is the quote that Peter quotes over here in Acts chapter 2, right? So in Joel chapter 2, at verse 28, he talks about God's Spirit being poured out upon all flesh. So it's not just Israel, like at the first Shavuot, first Pentecost at Mount Sinai, the law is just giving to Israel. But here, the Spirit's given out to all flesh. All that believe, that is. Right? And he says here at verse 24, and the floor shall be full of wheat, and the fat shall overflow with wine and oil. That would be done when there's a harvest going on. Right? Now the harvest would be in the 4th month, because the planting is done in the 1st month, Nisan. And I'm going to explain this a bit more as I go through this. So we see here in Acts chapter 2, it was at the day of Pentecost, and it was fully come. And then down here, I think it starts at verse 13, where they're talking about being full of new wine, right? Just like it was talking about in Joel, because it's the harvest time, the 4th month. And then he starts preaching onto them. And he preaches, actually ends up quoting this passage right here from Joel. And this is harvest time, right? And more interestingly enough, what Jesus himself says in John chapter 4 at verse 35, he says, say not ye, there are yet 4 months, then cometh harvest, right? So when they plant in the spring, in the 1st month of Nisan, which is what Jesus did, the harvest doesn't come until the 4th month. As we see here in John chapter 12, at verse 24, Jesus says, verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone, but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. So here, Jesus is talking about himself, where he is a corn of wheat, and he dies in the 1st month. He's being planted, and he tells us that it's 4 months until the harvest of that, which is what we get over here at Pentecost. The latter rain poured out, the harvest is ready. They're talking about the new wine, everything that was said in Joel chapter 2 is coming forth, and there we go. So we know that when we read this, it's actually saying you are to count 7 Sabbaths, then 50 days. And I know in past videos I was a bit confused because Shavuot is kind of new to me. I've always called it Pentecost. So I thought, oh, okay, they call Shavuot at the end of the 7 Sabbaths. And then Pentecost is the 50 days after, because Pentecost means 50. So I was like, oh, so they just split it up. Shavuot means the end of the 7 Sabbaths, and Pentecost is the end of the 50-day count. So I was like, okay. So I had that confusion, but now I realize that Shavuot is just a Jewish name for what the Greeks would call Pentecost, or what we also call Pentecost, right? So now I realize that they're one and the same, and that's why there might be some more confusion and correction of my past videos about lunar Sabbath and the rapture, or the lunar feast days and the rapture. They're only a few videos back. I just posted them not too long ago. So if you're watching this one, you can just look back on the list or whatever. But anyway, a couple more things I would like to add to the detail of this is something I'm looking into here, because in Acts chapter 1, right here, verse 3, it says that Jesus walked with them and was seen of them for 40 days after he rose from the dead, right? And then we have a few events that happen, like Jesus ascended, and then some time goes by and they're trying to figure out who's going to replace Judas, right? Little did they know that Jesus already picked Paul to do that. But then you come over here to Luke chapter 24. I don't know why it's blank right here. But at verse 49 it says, "And behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry ye in the city of Jerusalem until ye be endued with power from on high." Right? So we know that before he ascended, he told him to tarry in Jerusalem. And a lot of people think it's just a few days, but I don't think it is just a few days. I think this is not too long after the 7 Sabbaths, or maybe even right before it. So then they're going to have to do the 50-day wait, kind of like, Jesus going up to heaven is like Moses going up the mountain, and they had to wait 40 days, right? He went up for 40 days. So I think this is actually maybe shortly after the 7 Sabbaths. And then after the 40 days, when he comes down with the law, it's actually Jesus coming down with the Spirit at Pentecost, right? So we can see that connection, because Moses says there's going to be one like me, him you should listen to, him you should follow, right? And Moses, what did he do? He went up 40 days, came back with the law. Jesus goes up, pours out the Spirit, right? A difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, right? Hope you're able to follow along. I hope I'm simplifying this. So another interesting thing that I need to look into a little bit more is that there's about, 8 to 12 days that Jesus was walking after he rose that are not accounted for. So if Jesus walked with him for 40 days, and let's just say there's 8 days that were not accounted for, that would mean that they would just be 2 days away from Shavuot or Pentecost if it was at that time, right? But as Moses went up into the mountain, Jesus went up, and it was a 40-day thing, and then the coming of the law, then the coming of the Spirit. So again, this adds more evidence to support to count 7 Sabbaths, then 50 days. And the reason I always thought it was strange when I was reading this, because I was like, why does God say to count 7 Sabbaths, then count 50 days? Why doesn't he just say count 50 days and then count 50 days? Or count 7 Sabbaths, then 7 more Sabbaths? Well, that's because of the lunar calendar. Because if you use the lunar calendar, when you count 7 Sabbaths after first fruits, you're not going to get 50 days. As an example here, this is the calendar that we'll be using this year, lunar-wise, on top of our Gregorian calendar here. And first fruits over here on the 16th, and that's actually a couple days off. That would be the 17th of April. So over here, I have in green the Sabbaths, the blues, the new moons. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's come down here. 6, 7. And here we have the end of the 7 Sabbaths, right? And how many days would that be? From the 16, we got 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 43, 44 days. So you see, 44 days after first fruits. And it could be different times depending if this could have been a 29-day month, so it would have been actually about a day shorter, right? So that's something else to also take into consideration. That time frame can be different. That's why God says to count 7 Sabbaths, then 50 days. So then if you count 50 days from this point, you end up getting all the way down to here, the 21st of the 4th month on the Hebrew lunar calendar, but this would be the 20th of July, 2022 this year would be Pentecost or Shavuot. So that would be the correct calculation for doing that if you're going to use the lunar calendar. And this, again, is inspired by the information that Barry All was doing, and it reminded me of the lunar calendar back when I was a Seventh-day Adventist and learning about the lunar Sabbath and following God's calendar and not man's calendar, because as an Adventist, you're gung-ho trying to get away from the Catholic Church and how they put everything into the world, basically, as if they are taking the place of God, and they wanted to change his laws and his times, right? And they did change up his laws, and they changed up his times, and they're using their Gregorian calendar instead of God's lunar calendar. So that was one of the reasons why I was getting into all this stuff. And then seeing his video just a couple days ago, I was like, hey, that's cool that you're learning the lunar calendar, but this is how it's actually set up. It's not set up where you're going to have every Saturday is the Sabbath. On the lunar calendar, it changes month to month. It can't be the same day on the Gregorian calendar each month, because the months are each 29 to 30 days long, and because of that, it's impossible, because you would have to have 28 day months for it to land on the same day, like every Saturday or every Sunday. You'd have to have 28 day months, but since it's 29 to 30 days, it shifts. It either shifts over 1 day or 2 days. That's generally how it works. As you can see, in April, the Sabbath happened to be on Saturday, but the very next month it shifted over 2 days to Monday. And then it shifted just 1 day to Tuesday over here in June. And then in July, it shifts over 2 days to Thursday. That's if you're a Sabbatarian and you want to keep it according to God's calendar. Then, yeah, you'll definitely be a peculiar fella if you're doing that. I don't know what these red arrows came up here for. I think it's just saying because the full H is not on here. That's probably what it is. I have to shrink the font, I guess. It's weird that it worked fine for all of these, but it became much larger. Let me check here. Yeah, see, it says, no, it's 26. That explains it. I did 36 on these one. Alright, but anyway, that is how the calendar comes up. So July 20th would actually be the Pentecost, using the lunar calendar, counting 7 Sabbaths, then 50 days, right? And another interesting thing is when you search Shavuot, I decided to use this one with the 10 Commandments on it for this video, but you'll notice a lot of wheat. A lot of wheat going on, and that is harvest again in the 4th month, not the 3rd month, the 4th month on the Jewish lunar calendar, right? So for this to happen, it would be in the 4th month, and it's interesting because it's the wheat harvest, and the church is the wheat, and that is just fantastic. It makes it look like maybe there is some kind of rapture, right? And it's another interesting thing is that around this time is when God told Moses to gather the people to the mountain, right? And this could be when God tells Jesus to go get his bride, right? Come gather him, because at Mount Sinai was a marriage ceremony. They gave their vows. God says, hey, this is the law. You keep this and I'll be your God. I'll be your husband. And they said, I do. Yes, we'll keep this. We'll be your people. We'll be your wife. Right? And what are we supposed to be doing when we're raptured? We're going to a marriage. Right? So it's kind of exciting. A little more than a month away. little more than 30 days or so. Very, very interesting. Very exciting. But yeah, I'm going to keep learning about this, so there might be some more added detail, maybe removing of a detail because I got something wrong, as I did in the past couple of videos. I'm still correcting all that. But this one, things are becoming more clear to me. So hopefully I explain this well. Any questions, feel free to ask. Any disagreements, share them. I'm not infallible, and I'm learning these things. But yeah, that being said, look to the skies. Our salvation is near. Thanks for watching, and take care.